The KwaZulu-Natal High Court in Pietermaritzburg will today hand its ruling in the application by former President Jacob Zuma and French arms company Thales. The two applied for a permanent stay of prosecution in the corruption case. The charges date back to 2005, and both Zuma and Thales blame the state for unfair delays in the prosecution process. Zuma also argued that the decision to charge him was politically motivated. During closing arguments, both the legal teams of the applicants and the state blamed each other for the delays. At the last court appearance, Zuma's legal team also submitted new evidence in the application at the last minute. This being a letter which, according to Zuma's legal team, supports their argument of political meddling in the decision to charge Zuma. For more on the story now, let's cross over live to our reporter Ayanda Mhlongo, who is at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Ayanda, very good morning to you. I know you have a guest, but perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about what we can expect today. Will we see former President Jacob Zuma in court?
A very good morning to you, Leanne, and good morning to our viewers. Well, maybe firstly, Leanne, let's speak a little bit about what is happening outside. As you know that in previous appearances of the former president in this matter, there is quite a lot of activity that is happening outside the court with his supporters. This time around, Leanne, we are told that there has, that the decision or the announcement that this decision was going to be, or the ruling was going to be announced today by the judges here at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. So in terms of her supporters, those organizing the support for the former president, saying that there was not enough time to mobilize people to come through to the court. There is still, though, quite strong, there's a lot of security outside the court, not as much as we've seen in previous appearances. We are told yet, but we have not yet had the confirmation that the former president will not be in court today. In fact, I was earlier on just speaking to Mr. Nkosazana, who's one of those who the leaders of his support. They are going to be here in court, but as we understand from him, the last he noted was that the former president would not be here in court. We understand today that it is going to be a very short matter, as today the judge will be giving summary of their judgment, and of course it is for the former president an important day, as today he will find out whether or not his matter will proceed to trial, or this will be the end of the case. But to speak more about what we can expect, and of course just to get once again an understanding from our legal expert, I'm now joined by Advocate Brian Jackson. Thank you very much, Advocate, for your time this morning. I think just for the to remind our viewers, the application for a permanent stay of prosecution, we understand that there are certain requirements, extraordinary circumstances that need to exist for a court to grant a permanent stay. Take us through, in particular, looking at the case, what the former president and his team have been argued in this matter.
Thanks, Ayanda. The underlying test that the court will be looking at is the accused's rights on the proverbial scale, tested against the interest of justice. There are three issues that will be considered by the court. That is the undue delay, the resultant prejudice as alleged by the accused, as well as the extraordinary circumstances that you've made reference to. In relation to the first aspect, that being that of the undue delay, of course it is the accused's version that the undue delay has already infringed on their constitutional rights to a speedy trial, and that going forward it will then infringe on their constitutional rights to a fair trial. That's the basis for that being the perceived public opinion, as well as political influence, as alleged in their version. Now, looking at that against the prejudice, the court will be looking at the prejudice as alleged by the accused. Is it a perceived prejudice, or is it an actual prejudice? Now, that is an objective test. So when the court makes a deliberation on that very point, the court needs to satisfy itself that the prejudice as alleged, is it actually prejudicing the accused, or is it just a perceived prejudice? Now, in relation to the undue delay, the aspects that are looked at, if we looked at our case law, is that with the delay, and especially in this case where there's been a delay of 15 years, it reduces the accused's ability as they allege, in terms of the efficacy of the evidence they'll put before the trial court. Issues or facets such as the availability of witnesses, whether someone will be able to recount exactly what happened, as opposed to if they were posed the question as it happened closer to the time. So these are the aspects that the court will be looking at in terms of deliberating on whether or not, in fact, there was the undue delay has the consequence of the prejudice, and then, as we saw at the 11th hour on the last occasion when the matter was in court, there was the letter that was introduced by Advocate Sikakane. That is where the facet of the extraordinary circumstances comes into the fray. And in that regard, what the version there is that letter, as they allege, is that it further lends to the version of political conspiracy, and that there's a political drive as to why these charges were once again brought to the president.
Just very quickly, Advocate, just speak to us about the processes today. I know that it has been 5 months, of course, that the former president himself has been waiting at today's decision, but just very quickly in terms of what we can expect today in court.
One of two things can happen, Ayanda. Either judgments will be handed down in the motion court. If that happens, it's going to be very short. In fact, only the order will be read out and not the reasons. And only the motion court judge that is presiding over the motion court will hand down that judgment. If in fact the three judges return, being led by the Honourable Justice Mnguni, then we can expect at least a summarized version of the reasons behind it, and that's actually what we are hoping for, because if the former occurs, then we know no better the reasons as to how they get to the decision, as opposed to the latter.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Advocate, I know you're going to continue with us throughout the day. Thank you so much now for your time, Advocate Jackson. There, just giving us, of course, taking us through the permanent stay of prosecution application by the former president. But 9:30, the court is expected to deliver or hand down its ruling here at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. Back to you, Leanne.
Ayanda, thanks very much for the update.